everyone, welcome to The Film Cultist, the podcast where we try to find the diamond in the celluloid rough. I am your host, as always, Zach, and today I'm actually joined by a very special guest, a person that wrote a book that I was just so enthralled with. He also does 2 podcasts that I listen to at the gym, and every time I listen to it, it's a lot of fun, but I'm in a lot of pain while doing it. I want to announce my friend, Justin Decloux. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for writing this amazing book. I bought it pretty much the exact day that you said it was going to be, and I plowed through the book, like, beginning to end, and I was just enthralled because I had not really known who Albert Pyun was, and you pretty much are an Albert Pyun scholar at this point.
The only one.
Yeah, it's so exciting to have a book like this because the funny thing is like, I've watched a bunch of Albert Pyun movies, but I never, put the face to the movie, so to speak, with the director.
I mean, I think a lot of people have seen Albert Pyun films, and as I say in the book, he was a bit of a punching bag in the early 90s when he was in his most prolific period, and you couldn't go to a video store without seeing one of his films on the shelf.
Yeah, it's nuts because a lot of the movies that I watched, obviously the most famous one or infamous, I would suppose, would be the Captain America movie. That's one probably everyone has seen to an extent, either through, YouTube videos, reviews. But going through this book, it's actually really interesting how it's structured. It's not like you can pick and choose what review you want. If you read it in chronological order, it actually tells a story. And I think that's the most fascinating thing about this book. And I wanted to ask you, why did you want to write this book to begin with? Why did you pick Albert Pyun?
Well, Albert Pyun is a director that I kind of ran into when I was a teenager. I got one of his films, Mean Guns, at one of those bargain, 2 for $14 deals at HMV or Music World in Canada. And I remember watching the film and being kind of blown away by it and just being wowed by his creativity and his voice and the fact that it was obviously made with no money, but that it was fun. And unfortunately, I was swayed by everybody else's reviews online about him. And I went, oh, Mean Guns must be the exception. And the other ones are probably pretty bad. And it wasn't until I was working in a video store that one of my coworkers said, hey, you should check out Nemesis. This is a movie that I really love. And I was blown away because his movie Nemesis is such a mixture of energy, Hong Kong style gunplay, and all the stuff that I like cyberpunk aesthetics done in such an individualistic fashion. And then when I learned that he had made something like 44 films and that he was always making movies, that's what captured my imagination. I think I have an attraction to really prolific filmmakers in the sense that if they're approaching it from a personal place, not just TV directors who are just paying the bills by making movies or television.
Oh no, I gotta keep making movies or I'll lose my house.
Yeah.
Make whatever you want. I know in the early 2000s, there was a rampant amount of true crime TV shows and just true crime pretty much straight to video. And that was pretty much what it was.
And Albert Pyun, he was a guy that he was prolific, but in a way that was more self-destructive than financially helpful for him.
Yeah, the way I looked at it is almost like a curve. He goes up, goes down, goes back up some more. Then something terrible happens and he crashes down, but he still keeps climbing up like a Greek hero trying to pull that boulder up that mountain.
Yeah, he never gave up. I mean, he's still making movies now, and he came out of the gate with one of those you want to say stories that you never hear about, which is a young kid comes to Hollywood, he was an adult, but and he gets a movie made for $4 million. And then it's a huge box office smash. It makes $40 million. And that film is The Sword and the Sorcerer,
which has one of the greatest swords I have ever seen in a movie. I actually, full disclosure, I did watch a couple Albert Pyun movies before we recorded. And that was actually, The Sword and the Sorcerer. I actually ended up having to watch the Riff Tracks version of it, but I ignored that. Unfortunately, it's one of those things, because a lot of his movies are really hard to find, and the ones that I found might not have been the essentials. I did watch Nemesis, I watched Blast, and then obviously I have a copy of Captain America, so I tried to have a Pyunathon, and it was great.
I mean, approaching his film, and this is what I try to tackle in the book, is that some of them are just not good. And I don't dodge around that fact, but I try to find where they were in his career or what he was trying to do with them and at least find something of value in them. Sometimes I can't, but other times Vicious Lips, his third film, that's a hated film. And I found that it was just fascinating in the way that it was made. Because this is a guy that when things failed, he just pushed on through. And like you were saying, there were ups and downs because he would be given an opportunity, he would do it, and then he'd say, hey, I can make 2 more movies, but I'm going to do it for the price of 1, and I'll do it in even less days.
Isn't that like the movie Deceit? That was one of those movies?
Yeah, Deceit is the film that when I heard about it and that he had made it, I was like, wow, who is this guy? Because, another famous Albert Pyun film is Cyborg, the Jean-Claude Van Damme one.
Yes.
It's the dumb sci-fi canon action picture where Jean-Claude Van Damme fights in the rain without a shirt, and he does the splits a lot.
I mean, isn't that just Jean-Claude Van Damme in a wholesome nutshell?
Yeah, pretty much. And when Pyun made Cyborg, he had a completely different vision of what he wanted the movie to be. And Canon wanted no part of it. They threw out his kind of like doom metal score that he had gotten his composers to write. They said, we'd rather shoot ourselves in the head than release the film in black and white, which is what Albert Pyun wanted.
I feel like that should be like the slogan on the box, because didn't they re-release Cyborg with it being in black and white and with the score?
They didn't. There's actually no black and white version, but you just set that saturation on your television or your computer to 0 and you get pretty close.
Yeah, if you squint or, you just close your eyes and imagine in black and white.
Yeah, and so Canon forced him to go do reshoots on Cyborg, and he was pissed. So what he ended up doing was that he wrote a script really quick called Deceit, and he got a bunch of actor friends, and he shot it in secret on the reshoot stage of Cyborg. And when I hear that, like, that's amazing to me. And he didn't just do it like so you would have a product that he could sell and make money. He did it because he wanted to make a movie, and he also had a story to tell. And that's what I find amazing about his career, is that whether I like a movie or not, most of the time he was doing it for a specific reason. Like, he wanted to chase that dragon that he could never really catch in his career.
I heard once that he's like considered like the 90s version of Ed Wood, which it can be true to an extent, but the way he looks at his movies, he just doesn't give up. Like, I know I actually was fascinated by the story and how during they were filming Captain America, they ran out of money and he would just film just scenes without telling anyone that there wasn't any film in the camera.
Yeah, Captain America is like the thing that essentially killed his career. Like, Albert Pyun, when he made Sword and the Sorcerer, can you imagine what would have happened if, like, maybe Steven Spielberg had seen the movie and was like, oh, I want to give this kid a chance to make a movie for Amblin. And that didn't happen. And unfortunately, what ended up playing out in his career over and over again was that he would have this crazy project that he would most of the time raise the money for independently, and then it would either fail or be too crazy, or there was something that would result in it being kind of half-baked. And Captain America is one of those half-baked situations where he had been working for Canon Films for a few movies. He had played it safe with films like Down Twisted and Dangerously Close. And they gave him Captain America to make, and the budget wasn't there. They cut the budget like a few weeks before it started, and instead of him going like, I can't do this, he just pressed on. And that was to his detriment because, I mean, you've seen Captain America, and it is a wobbly motion picture.
I love it because the way you say it in the book probably sums up the movie, which is it's Captain America, but his superpower is just being a super loser. And I love
yes,
that.
It is.
It's funny because like his biggest superpower is pretty much, I think I'm going to be sick. And he gets out of the car, which, funny story about this. Me and my friends were obsessed with this joke. And we went to go see Captain America Civil War. My friend was dressed as Captain America. And I thought this was the stupidest thing. Like, you could never get someone to do this. And when we were driving on the freeway, like, hey, could you pull over? I think I'm going to be sick. I pulled my car over because I'm a nice guy. He gets out, pretends to start vomiting. And like, I'm about to open my door and I realized, wait, this is stupid. I know what's about to happen. And I was almost about to do it. I'm like, oh my God, Captain America might actually have one of the greatest stupid superpowers.
That's amazing. I mean, I love that Matt Salinger, son of J.D. Salinger, in the Captain America movie, looks terrified the entire time. Like,
I always think about getting so distracted by the rubber ears he has on the mask that aren't even his.
Like, I can understand that when, like, Albert Pyun cast Matt Salinger, he's like, oh, yeah, he's kind of got, like, the cut of a Bruce Campbell. But once you put that rubber suit on him, he looks kind of, like, mushy, like the face. He looks like a big goofball the entire time.
I see what they're trying to go for, like, the weird all-American look, because they have, like, that weird, like, square jaw. If you squint, he, like, looks like Captain America in the comics. But then it just goes overboard from there because a lot of that movie is just like, oh, we'll shoot it, some of it in the period piece, which has the greatest like Heil Hitler psych I've ever seen in a movie.
Yes.
And then you get to like we're just going to have a vacation. This is the vacation movie. And it just doesn't work as a superhero movie, but that's what makes it so charming.
Yeah, in a world where there's no Captain America movies, I can see people being kind of infuriated by it, but we live in a world now where there's a whole bunch of them, so this one is kind of like a fun novelty.
It's a lot like the Fantastic Four movie that Roger Corman made. It has that same kind of wholesome charm to it, even though, how do you define a superhero movie from that? I guess you had Nick Fury with David Hasselhoff, but that was about it.
There wasn't much. I mean, Albert Pyun at one point was going to make a Spider-Man film, but I think that if he had been able to pull it off and Cannon's checks hadn't bounced to Marvel, it would have probably been along the lines of his Captain America picture.
Yeah, because I remember I was hearing that he wanted to do both Masters of the Universe 2 and Spider-Man. Pretty much he was going to film Spider-Man first before Peter Parker gets bit by the spider, then cease shooting, and then start doing Masters of the Universe and hopefully get the paycheck to finish the other half of Spider-Man, which is crazy.
What ended up happening was that Cannon Films checks bounced at both Hasbro and Marvel, and they were just about to start shooting, and Pyun went, okay, I can just write a script really fast and we can use the costumes for Masters of the Universe Part 2 for this new film I have, Cyborg. So all the villains in Cyborg are dressed the way the heroes were going to be dressed in Masters of the Universe Part 2.
Oh man, that's wonderful. That's amazing. But even when it comes to Albert Pyun's career, like he never gave up. And you see that because a lot of his movies, like I remember the first Albert Pyun movie I saw was actually Elvira did like a revival recently, and I saw Dollman and I saw Arcade. And that's the funny thing is like Pyun doesn't get this recognition that most directors get, even with this huge bulk of a library, because a lot of his movies are really hard to find. Like Radioactive Dreams, I kind of watched it on YouTube in Spanish, and I know very little Spanish.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the root of that. He worked as an independent a lot, and he would raise financing through a bunch of investors, and that actually becomes a massive problem when you want to re-release those films, because it's like a Medusa, is that there's a million different people that own the rights or a piece of the film, and a film like Radioactive Dreams, while it does have its cult following, no distributor is going to like jump in and do the hard work, because, people may not buy it. And it's going to take a lot of work to put that film out, which is a bummer because I love Radioactive Dreams. It's like Streets of Fire in my eyes.
The way you talked about it was like, even if I saw it in Spanish, they had like the still like peppy voices. It's like two detective boys in the apocalypse that just grew up reading detective novels. And it sounds great. It's a musical. And it's one of those where I think you showed it on film. That must have been amazing because, again, saw it on VHS. So it was like looked pretty bad.
Yeah, even the DVD version, Germany put out an official version with the soundtrack, which is also amazing, is not as colorful as the film print that we were able to play in Toronto when I showed it like a few months back.
Doing the research for this book, how did you come about doing the research? Because I feel like it's one of those where it almost seems like at times like a fool's errand, but it's not the way you have this book. It's very well researched, well documented. And how did you start? Like, where was the thread that you went? Like, I gotta keep going.
So I kind of became, like I said, obsessed with Albert Pyun after I saw Nemesis, and I started watching more of his films. And I'm like, who is this guy? Like, he's done so much stuff and so many high concept projects, which is like a real attraction to me. I'm a filmmaker myself, and I love to like see people just swing for the fences, especially when it's like independent productions, like Pyun would do. And I always wanted to write a book on him, but my worry was he is such a well-known figure. I'm sure somebody is writing a book somewhere about him. And no matter what I do, it probably wouldn't be as comprehensive as like a professional doing it. And so I kind of kept putting it off and putting it off. And it was also like, I didn't know what structure I wanted to take with the book. I had never done this before. Was it going to be a biography? Was I going to highlight movies or themes? And then what happened was Scream Factory or Shout Factory put out Vicious Lips, Pyun's third film, which is a shamble of a motion picture, but a fascinating one once you know the background of it. And I bought it on Blu-ray, and it was exorbitantly expensive. And I told myself, I need to write at least 500 words on this movie and post it on my website to justify my purchase of this picture.
Yeah, no, I did the exact same thing with like Night Beast. Like I had to to justify it, I had to do a review of the movie because Vinegar Syndrome just put out a Blu-ray of it, and I'm like, I need to justify buying this.
And so I wrote the review, and I found that I had like a kind of interesting perspective on it, and that I could go a little bit beyond just the movie and talk about the background of the picture, of what I knew or what I could find out. And then I thought to myself, oh, what if I watched all of Albert Pyun's films? There's over 40, I think. And I did a review like this for all of them. And my limitations were, I want it to be over 500 words, and that's it. And I would probably have a book at the end of that. And then I went, oh man, I don't want to watch all 44 of his movies.
What have I done? I've doomed myself.
So I actually, after the Vicious Lip things, I kind of put it in a drawer and didn't return to it until me and my pal Peter Kaplowski, we programmed a series in Toronto called the Laser Blast Film Society, and we decided, hey, let's play that 35mm print of Radioactive Dream that's been floating around. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And then the fool's errand just appeared in my eyes, and I said, I should do that book thing that I wanted to do. Me and my pal Will Sloan had published a journal thing through Amazon, the Important Cinema Club Journal. And that was so much fun to do. And now that I knew that it could be self-published like this, I was like, I can do this. It's probably not that hard. I have a month and a half before the screening. How hard can it be?
As the movie was unspooling, you're like, I'm facing my own mortality. I gotta watch all these movies.
Yeah. And I even like considered to myself like, could I just write one 500 review for all of Albert Pyun's Urban trilogy? Because they were all shot at the same time. And I was like, no, over 500 words for each review. Now, I cheated a little bit by using like fun facts or like kind of historical or anecdotal information that didn't really fit in the review. And I counted that in the 500 words. But I somehow was able to do it in the time frame that I had given myself. And at the end of it, I had a book. And research-wise, it was a lot of stuff that I already knew where to go to just verify stuff. And I had always been listening to Albert Pyun's commentary tracks and reading his interviews. So it was all information that I was aware of as well.
It can always be like a maze when it comes to that stuff, because if you're like really invested, like for me, I love Ray Bradbury. So I ended up, finding things that, people didn't know. And I ended up doing a whole project about his life. And it became like a huge Herculean task. But once it's done, it felt great. And going through like some of his works that people haven't seen, some things that haven't been published, it must feel interesting, especially like going through trying to find all of his movies. Even a lot of them are just super hard to find. Once again, Radioactive Dreams, you got to see a print of it, but like to the normal person, it must be really hard to like just go into like his filmography and just watch it straight through, even if there are a couple clunkers and stinkers.
Well, I wanted the book, and one of the ways that allowed me to write it is that, like, I knew it wasn't going to be like the comprehensive everything Albert Pyun book. But to use a very pretentious example, I was thinking of what the French New Wave directors Claude Chabrol and Eric Romer did with their Hitchcock book, where they did essentially what I did, which was just watch every Hitchcock film and just review it and like a little like analysis. And some of the movies, they even said, like, I saw this months ago, but I don't really remember it. But this is my paragraph on it. And I'm hoping that the book that I wrote is like an open door for people, that they're going to want to go check out those movies and just explore his filmography and maybe even discover stuff that I didn't talk about, because there's a lot to unearth. And like I say in the introduction of my book, I can't believe I'm the first person writing something like this about him, because there's, even if you don't like the movies, there's such a such an interesting background to his career and how he made these pictures.
Yes, it's really interesting, especially, he's a man that came from Hawaii, didn't have any film connections, and just started making movies. Well, I guess he did like commercials and little things here and there, but he basically quintessentially had the American dream of, I'm going to make an American movie and I'm going to kick ass. And it's interesting, especially I think with this book, it's really comprehensive, but also you have like the way it's outlined. It's like, I wanted to get it digitally, but I couldn't. And I realized very quickly, because there's like fun things like pictures and there's wonderful interviews. Like some of your interviews are so fascinating, getting people that, worked with Albert Pyun. And I just would love to hear, like, how did you find these people? How did you contact them? What was it like, interviewing these people that probably have never been interviewed before?
When I do a project like this, I always assume that, like, somebody's probably already done it. Like, it's crazy that I would be the first person to do this. And as I was watching his movies, and I had been aware that, like, he worked with the same cinematographer over and over and over again. And his movies look great. And he worked with the same composer and sound designer for, like, 25, 30 years. So it would be fun to interview them. And actually, like, I remember talking to my partner, Emily. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do any interviews. That's too much work. Like, I just want to get this through. And then I was like, maybe I'll just shoot off an email.
Maybe just
and
one.
ask them. And if they get back to me, they get back to me. If they don't, they don't. So for Bose, the cinematographer, George Muradian, I just typed his name into Google. He had an official website, and I sent off an email. And the same thing with Albert Pyun's composer. He just had an official website, and it looked old. So I wasn't going to be surprised if I didn't receive a reply. But from both of them, I did. And they were like, oh, yeah, I'd be happy to talk about his movies. And even at that time, I wasn't like, I'm writing a book. I was just like, I'm doing a project. Because in case something fell through, I didn't want to get their hopes too high. And they were very accommodating with their time. And like the cinematographer said, he had never spoken to anybody about this, which is baffling to me because they made so many movies together and his films look really good in like the video boom. But like the 90s direct-to-video time has not been explored very much as far as like research and books and stuff like that. I don't know if it's still too fresh, but when you consider like, you know, the 50 science fiction films, there's a million books interviewing and discussing those pictures, but the 90s are just kind of like forgotten in the dust.
It's one of those things that I feel like it just takes time because we're still in the 80s of nostalgia. We'll get to the 90s very, very soon, I feel like, within the next 3 to 4 years, and I think we'll be able to explore those a lot more because we're starting to get books about shot and video movies, like finally.
Like Analog Nightmare and that Bleeding Skull movie, which are amazing books.
It'll be interesting to see the 90s because a lot of Albert Pyun's best work comes within the 90s.
It's tough because when you have a filmography that big, I think it does hurt the artist because while there's a lot to explore, the curious will often watch 1 or 2 movies and go, oh no, I don't like this. Like, I don't want to see any more. And I'll assume that the rest are like this. And Albert Pyun, like you mentioned earlier, he had a really bad reputation, pretty much to this day. And I'm not sure why it's as hateful as it is, but it is. And it's really unfortunate. And like when I was a teenager, it turned me off. I remember reading a review. I think it was probably on like Stomp Tokyo or Cold Fusion Video or something like that. That was like 10,000 words and was like, oh, Nights is so bad. Nights feels like an Ed Wood film. And when you watch Nights, it's like Albert Pyun in the early 90s trying to make a Hong Kong film, which nobody else was doing at that time.
Yes. And even when it comes to Albert Pyun, I feel like there's a lot of things like he would experiment. He would do things that people weren't necessarily doing at the time. Like, hey, we'll give you a superhero movie. All of a sudden, like even though it's bad, he does things that are like funny and goofy, but at least it's his vision. I think that's the most important thing. Like you can tell he had a vision and he was trying to execute it.
Oftentimes he had like a really crazy idea and he just like the execution didn't quite work. Like Alien from LA, which is mostly known as a Mystery Science Theater 3000 movie, is kind of famous for the fact that the lead actress, she talks like a little girl the entire time. And it's like nails on a chalkboard throughout the entire picture. And what's interesting about that film is like Albert Pyun is at once trying to do his version of Terry Gilliam's Brazil, and he also wants to make like a swashbuckling, almost like Errol Flynn kind of movie. And nobody ever talks about that. They just focus on like the
poor
lead
casting.
Actors. Exactly. And it's a bummer that his films came in a period where they got purchased by Mystery Science Theater 3000 or Sword and the Sorcerer can only be seen as a riff tracks right now.
Which is annoying because, you know, I love Mystery Science Theater, but then with that, you have that weird stigma of, oh, it's a bad movie. Like, people say, like, This Island Earth is a terrible movie. I love that movie. It's so great. But you have that stigma.
Yeah, it's tough. And I think that Albert Pyun has been really hurt by those kind of things. Like, people starting, like, a bad movie podcast or a bad movie website. Albert Pyun's, like, core filmography that everybody knows, like the Captain Americas and the Cyborg, are the easiest go-tos. Like, he is a punching bag in the public's eye. So, you know, there's no worries watching, like, Captain America and being like, oh, it's so bad, because that's what everybody else says. Like, it's universally accepted. And that's such a bummer when he did so much.
It's always hard to, like, try to speculate why do people, like, hate this man, even though, like, you see it as his vast body of work, and it's like some of them are clunkers, but a lot of it, while you're reading the book, it's like you might watch the movie, but if you read your book, you realize there was more behind the scenes than you think. Some of it had to do with money, like a lot of the time. Like, I think in Radioactive Dreams, didn't the movie just got taken away from him from the Bond company? Like, there's things that were just out of his control.
yeah, like you said, it was out of his control, or it was him kind of pushing himself too hard. And because he never had that big hit, he never had the authority to kind of control his experimentations. Like, if any of his films had been a success like Sword and the Sorcerer was, I think that his career would have gone differently. And I think people would have written books about him because his experimentations would have been like mirrored in his successes. But that never happened. And it's a real bummer. I mean, something like Nemesis was a hit when it came out on video, but it was a video hit. And Albert Pyun never wanted to kind of recreate the same thing every time. So, like, Nemesis 2 is radically different than Nemesis 1. And I think that kind of turned people off a little bit.
Yeah, even with Nemesis, like, I watched it. It's super crazy. I love that movie just because I always think of trench coats and guns and robots. Yeah. It's great. And then you get to Nemesis 2, and it's different. Then you get to Nemesis 3, it's like, whoa, this is really different. I miss I miss trench coats and guns like that. It's like, if you watch it, you're like, wait a second, this might be like a Matrix clone. But it's like, you look at it, it's like, wait, this is early 90s. And like, oh my God.
Well, I wrote so many times in my book, like, oh, I thought he was inspired by this. And then I'd look and I'd be like, oh, that came out 3 or 4 years later.
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing. He's always pushing the curve on pretty much when things are coming out. Like, he's setting trends before trends even started at times. It's nuts.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like, when you learn why Nemesis 3 is the way that it is, the fact that he shot Nemesis 2 and 3 back to back, and he spent all the money on 2, but still had to deliver a 3, it makes a lot more sense. Doesn't make it more enjoyable, but it does give it context to understand, oh, okay, that's why it's the way it is.
Yes, even when it comes to, like, you know, talking about like how the production is like some of his movies he would shoot it on film and then they would just go straight to video. That's something that I heard that just happened a lot.
All the time, yeah. Like, everybody creative that I spoke to, his cinematographer, his composer, were like, you know, we always were told that it was going to be a theatrical picture. And then it wasn't. And it just went straight to video. But we worked on every film under the assumption that it was going to be a theatrical film. And I think that that's why a lot of them stand like the test of time, is that like the cinematographer was shooting them anamorphically. He was using tons of filters and wanting to make them look as good as they could. And then they would play once in a theater, usually for screening for the production. And then they'd go straight to video in a pan and scan transfer that wouldn't even match the color timing that he did for it.
And I'm sure they probably look beautiful if they ever were to get like a Blu-ray or a high definition transfer.
Yeah, like the Nemesis movies were released by MVD, and so was Blast and Crazy Six, which are later period films where he's kind of trying to play it a little bit more safe. But even those pictures, you can watch them and be like, wow, these look great.
When I saw Nemesis, it was on Amazon. It looked amazing. It was just so much fun. I was like laughing. Even when I saw Blast, it looked like a really good movie. I was like, oh wait, it's Die Hard at the Olympics, but it's great.
Yeah, like I make the argument in my section on Blast that, yeah, it's a generic Die Hard at an Olympic pool movie. But if you notice that, like, once the terrorists come in, the hero doesn't speak for 40 minutes. Like, that was a choice that was made when that picture was being put together, and that just gets swept away because people are like, oh, it's Albert Pyun.
Yeah, no one's going to watch it. It's going to, you know, we just need to fill the backlogs and get that in the blockbusters and the Hollywood videos and whatever we need.
Like, he's a director that, like, if Sword and the Sorcerer came out and, for example, Shout Factory put it out or Radioactive Dreams came out, I think that he would get a reevaluation that is long needed for his career.
Yes, I feel like a lot of Albert Pyun's movies need reevaluation just because, you know, time, like in the moment, it probably thought it was like, oh, this is stupid. But as you disattach from the decades, you look at it, I feel like there might be like a renaissance almost, or at least a revival. Because he's still making movies kind of today. Because even if, you know, he has his health problems, he's still trying to make a movie no matter what.
He will not stop making movies until he passes away. And everybody I spoke to told me that. I mean, like, if you look at a movie like Nemesis 4, and if you watch it on its own, like you pick it off the video store shelf, you'd be like, what is this? This has nothing to do with any of the Nemesis movies. And then you learn, oh, he made it because he had to do reshoots on another film and he was frustrated. So he channeled all those frustrations into Nemesis 4, which has nothing to do with it. The movie becomes more interesting than it would be. Now, that's not fair to him, or to be specific, not fair to the audience, because a movie should live on its own. You shouldn't need to know the context to enjoy it. But I think the issue with Albert Pyun's filmography is that he was often making films within genre templates and exploring things that genre fans were like, no, give me what I want. Give me the gunfights. Give me, the comedy and the quips. And he wasn't giving them that. He was giving them other stuff, but they would just kind of push it away because a lot of the time they wouldn't get the bare minimum of what defines a Nemesis film, for example.
He's like the reverse Sam Raimi. I'll give you guys some things that you like, but I won't give you guys all the things you want in my movie.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's a lot of reason for that, like shooting a film in 6 days or 10 days. Like even Mean Guns, he shot it in, I think, 12 days and only had Christopher Lambert, who is on the cover and stars in the film, for 2.5 or something like that.
Even with Deceit, he made it in 3 days. I could never make a movie in 3 days. I don't know how he kept consistently doing that.
Not even 3 days. I believe it was 3 nights, because he did it after
God.
The Cyborg reshoots were done. And I spoke to one of the actors in the film, and he told me, you had one take. If you missed your line, it's too bad. He says that he was in the darkness in one of his scenes giving a monologue, and he missed his mark. So he's completely in shadows. And that's in the movie because they didn't have time to reshoot another take.
Yeah, because once again, he's supposed to be doing reshoots, but he's taking the camera equipment that he only borrowed for a week to just make a movie, which is almost like the Wild West when you think about it. Didn't he also sell it back to Canon too?
He did sell it back to Canon. They were just impressed that he had been able to do it.
When it comes to, what do you think is Albert Pyun's, you have his golden age, but what do you think are the best era for him?
It's tough because when I broke the book up into kind of periods, I wanted to be descriptive about that period. But I also knew that because he made so many movies, that there were going to be clunkers as well as great ones. I love the first 3 movies that he made because they're a young guy that's really hungry to make movies, and he's swinging for the fences with Sword and the Sorcerer, Radioactive Dreams, and Vicious Lips. And while something like Vicious Lips is, by all accounts, a complete failure, it's still fascinating. And to know that he made that in reaction to the disaster of Radioactive Dreams, and he was like, I can do a film in 7 days. I'll show them all. And then he couldn't, but he still somehow continued going on. I love that. Probably I do have a golden period in my book, and I believe it goes from right after Canon to I think it's Nemesis 3, and that's the chunk of the best movies. Not necessarily the most interesting ones, but the ones that I think are the most consistent, and that he could get his vision on screen the way that he imagined it.
Now, what would you say, Justin, about his themes? What are the things he always kinds to hit? Because when you have about 40 movies, some of the themes kind of come back to the surface, usually.
Well, it's easy to say he was obsessed with cyborgs, or the nature of humanity, because he made a lot of cyborg pictures. But a lot of the time,
Nemesis is pretty much I'm not a robot, I'm a man.
And something like Omega Doom that stars the recently deceased Rutger Hauer is all about that too. And that one's fascinating because it's all about the nature of human existence, and they're all robots, and they went to war with humanity and they won. But now they don't know what to do, and the only thing they can do is get into a Yojimbo-style situation of 2 warring robot clans just waiting to fight each other because they need weapons, because they think they need to defend themselves from humans.
Oh, man. Well, I guess war is our option, I guess.
Yeah, we don't know anything else. The hollowness of revenge is something that he tackles a lot in his filmography. He's... I'd be comfortable calling him a feminist, that he was really big on putting women in powerful roles that didn't put them in, the shoes of men, didn't try to make them masculine, and all the femininity was gone. He was one of the few filmmakers who made action films with female bodybuilders. And he didn't do it in a way was like, oh, they're just like guys. He approached it from a way that he found this attractive. Those characters, like in the Nemesis films, they're not taking the place of men. They're still women. It's just they're muscular and strong. And like he did that in Ravenhawk as well, a film he made for HBO out of all companies.
Really?
Where he cast the star of Pumping Iron 2, which is all women, in this main role, which is kind of a mixture of Sergio Corbucci's Navajo Joe and Steven Seagal's On Deadly Ground, where the main character, the titular, Ravenhawk, comes to get revenge against all the men who framed her as a child of murdering her parents and who are also destroying the native land that she grew up on. He's always approaching these things from like those interesting angles. I think that a theme that he goes back to a lot as well is staying true to yourself. That's present in something like Radioactive Dreams, where the whole thesis is, you know, I want to have fun and I want to be goofy, but the world is so dark and miserable, and you could turn dark and miserable and make life difficult for yourself and be a reflection of what everybody else is acting on, or you could be light and goofy and you could just keep going no matter how bad things get, and like Radioactive Dream ends, have a musical number and a dance
golly
scene at
gee
the end.
whiz.
Yep. And, you know, I think that that is a reflection of not only his worldview, but it's also how he was able to get through his career, because, you know, he had so many ups and downs that anybody else, I mean, I would have probably been like, okay, I'm not going to make movies.
I would have given up years ago. It's like the stress would have just been like, I have to like really like make these movies in such a short crunch time. But the way he does it, he almost like he just loves doing, well, he loves making movies, but he loves like that crunch time. Because for me, you know, I'm a stage manager sometimes, and it's like, it's almost like a weird thrill at times when you're like, oh, everything's going wrong, but I'm the only person that could possibly make it go right.
Well, I was shocked when I talked to, there's 3 interviews in the book with an actor, the cinematographer, and the composer, and that none of them had stories of like, oh, yes, it was a nightmare on set. Like, I never thought we were going to do it. They were all like, it was very pleasant. Albert was always zen, never lost his cool, and we just got through it. It was hard, but we were able to plow through it. Now, I suspect they were probably looking back at their past through rose-colored nostalgia glasses. But if there was anything really bad, I'm sure they would have probably remembered it. And the sense I got was that Albert like really kept it on his own shoulders, and he was the one that was able to power through. And what's most frustrating about reading about him in the 90s or the early 2000s on the internet is that like people were like, oh, it was the cinematographer who actually directed Sword and the Sorcerer, or it was the producer who came in and directed this movie. And it's like, he made 44 films. He did not just like con his way through every production. And there's a consistency to all his work as well.
Yeah, and when it comes to it, like, there's a lot of movies, I always go back to, like, Sean Video movies. It's like, oh, yeah, they're made cheap, but the way he makes his movies, they're real movies. Like, they actually, you know, have a plot structure. Some of them have amazing special effects, like going back to Nemesis, the ending of that movie. Even if it's, like, clunky stop motion, it's fun stop motion. Oh, it's great.
Oh, love that ending, yeah. It's bananas. There's a weird edit of Nemesis that was released on Japanese Laserdisc that doesn't have that stop motion ending.
What? Oh my god. It reminded me a lot of like the stop motion from Rotor, and I loved it.
Yes. You know, it's weird because I feel like if Nemesis had been released theatrically, you know, he would probably have had a different career. But I think he just kept promising people like, oh, I can do it for less money and I can do it for less days, until Albert was in a position where, you know, you can't make a movie in 3 days because it's going to look very ramshackle, and then people are going to assume all your movies always look like that.
It ain't no Who Killed Captain Alex at that point.
No. Well, I love Who Killed Captain Alex.
I love it. I just talked about it recently. But like, you can even like do something like that, but the way Albert Pyun like is so bombastic, and he's just obviously must be a very charismatic guy to keep getting movies, because you think about like, oh, if you have one stinker, that might end your whole career. But consistently, he'd have flops, but he'd still find ways to make movies.
I think it's because he just promised people that he could deliver it on time and budget. He had kind of a disaster with Vicious Lips, which was distributed by Empire Picture, Charles Band's company. And it wasn't even released in North America. and he still worked for Full Moon and shot 2 movies back to back.
Well, to be fair, they'll hire pretty much anyone for Full Moon.
They would. And Albert actually left Arcade before it was completed. So, he has not worked for Full Moon since then.
No, and maybe Full Moon doesn't need Albert Pyun.
No.
They're on, the 80th Puppet Master movie at this point, The Littlest Reich? It's on Shudder.
Yeah, The Littlest Reich is technically not a Full Moon picture. That was a different company. Cinestate took over and made it.
Oh my god. Oh, it's a disaster.
There are dueling Puppet Master universes at this point.
What is this, like Chucky?
That's exactly what it is.
Oh my god, because there's now going to be Charles, and there's going to be Chucky. My brain hurts.
Oof, yeah. But as far as Albert Pyun's best movies, because people keep asking me those questions, like, what are his best? Which one should I check out?
I was about to ask you that. I was going to ask you what's your best, but because in your book you have what are the essential? What are the ones that if you can find it, you should just buy it and watch it?
Yeah, Radioactive Dreams, definitely. Deceit, knowing the context that it was made in. The director's cut of Cyborg, which is called Slinger, and is available on Blu-ray in Germany. So I would recommend, it's really cheap. You can get it for $10. So I recommend picking it up from there. And then just, like I said, turn the saturation down on your TV till it's in black and white and enjoy. It's a completely different movie that way.
And if you're colorblind, even better.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's already black and white. It may lack some of that novelty, though. I mean, Nemesis is very easily available now. Like you said, it's on Amazon, and MVD, the Blu-ray label, put it out in a fantastic looking print. So that would probably be the first one I would tell people to go check out. Because to see a lot of Albert's movies in the format that, they should be watched in, you would have to buy a Blu-ray from Germany. Like Mean Guns has a great special edition from Germany. But you'd have to buy it from Amazon.de. Otherwise, the American DVD looks like crap. It's full screen, pan and scan. And the cinematographer shot the film overexposed, so there's patches of light. And the person that seemed to be transferring it to digital dulled all the colors in a reaction to that. So it looks really soft. And you're like, ugh.
So pretty much short, Albert Pyun, his worst part is the people in post-production.
Yeah, like I said about genre, nobody cares how Kickboxer 2 The Road Back looks on DVD, because people who are going to buy it are going to buy it no matter what.
Because it says Kickboxer on it.
Exactly. So all the hard work that everybody working on the film put into it is kind of lost because the people who are giving it to an audience are not treating it the way it should be treated.
Yes, and I think we should treat Albert Pyun's work with some respect. I feel like a man that's made 45 movies, he might know something about making movies, just a little bit.
Yes, yeah. I mean, when you read the book, there's some that I really don't like. Hong Kong 97. But, I understand how they were made, because something like Hong Kong 97 was 2 other films essentially back to back. And one of those films is his version of Gymkhana, except with a woman gymnast in the main role.
I think you just won me over by saying it's like Gymkhana.
Yeah, it's an amazing movie called Spitfire. Okay, wait. Amazing is a strong word. A very fun movie called Spitfire. And it actually stars a real life Olympian gymnast who her father is Lance Henriksen, who plays a James Bond-like figure who in the opening of the movie escapes on a jetpack.
Justin, can you hear that? Cha-ching. Oh, I searched cha-ching somewhere. I love it.
Yeah. And what's interesting about his back catalog is that, like I mentioned, MVD is putting it out. It's putting out a lot of it, but a lot of his films are also appearing on Amazon in remastered versions as well. Like Brain Smasher, A Love Story, his Andrew Dice Clay film, showed up on Amazon in a beautiful remastered scan of, I assume, a print. And I don't know how it got there. None of the people who worked on the film know how it got there, or if there's any plans to make it more available, because it was on Amazon and now it's gone. I don't believe it's up there anymore.
It's just one of those things that comes with the wind and goes with the wind.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Justin, for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. If you want to find Justin's book, you can find Justin's book pretty much anywhere on Amazon, right? At this point, it's all over the world. Is that correct, Justin?
Oh, yep. Every Amazon. It's on there.
Yes, so you can get Justin's book, Radioactive Dreams, The Cinema of Albert Pyun, and that's by Justin Decloux. And I really recommend it. You also have two amazing podcasts. You have the Important Cinema Club, as well as No Such Thing as a Bad Movie. Why don't you talk about this for a little bit? Because all my podcaster friends need, and all my listeners need, is more podcasts to listen to.
Yeah. So Important Cinema Club is a podcast I started with Will Sloan. And when we started it, he was actually an acquaintance, not really a friend. And I saw him and I'm like, ooh, I can talk about art films with him. And what we quickly discovered when we started doing the podcast is we like art films and we like trash as well. So the podcast is every week we talk about usually like an actor, a director, sometimes a subject. And we just talk for like 30 minutes about that thing. Essentially, it's like it sounds kind of boring for me to say it's like a lecture, but that's what it is. And it's also like a conversation between two friends, because those are my favorite podcasts, the ones that seem a little bit off the cuff and there's an energy there. And Important Cinema Club, I hope that if people are interested, they just check out episodes even if they haven't heard about the person that we're talking about, because that's what we kind of designed it for people to discover new stuff as they go along. And No Such Thing as a Bad Movie is, I had some friends that I thought it would be fun to do like a bad movie podcast, but I'm not a big fan of those and the idea of just making fun of movies. So my idea was that we would watch bad movies, and putting them in air quotes, and then we would all have to talk about one thing we liked about the movie.
And sometimes that's the best part, because you highlight some of the not so good parts of those movies. Like I was just watching your episode on Catwoman and The Uninvited, and I was like in tears yesterday. It's great.
It's a lot of fun, and I mean, it's not like we're always positive, because that would be impossible with some of the movies we watch.
No.
but we try to get like a funny angle on it. And I should also point out, there's a podcast long dormant, but I think we did almost 80 episodes, called Loose Cannons, that I did it with another friend, Matthew Kumar.
It's still there.
And
it's still there.
That one, hopefully it's coming back this month at some point.
Oh, that's amazing. I like Loose Cannons a lot.
Yeah, and we went through the filmography of Cannon Films, but we started at the beginning before even Golan and Globus owned the company, and we just did an episode on every movie. And as my pal Will Sloan said, some of the podcasts or the movies we talked about, nobody has ever talked about them before. I was actually contacted by the son of one of the stars of a sexual assaulty Western called The Wicked Die Slow. And he asked me, do you have a copy of the movie? My father is in that film, and I've never seen it. And I sent it to him.
That is an amazing story. You can imagine, like, I always think about the story of, I always forget her name. She's the little girl in Manos Hands of Fate, and they were, like, looking so hard to find Manos Hands of Fate, and they found it one day because it was playing at Mystery Science Theater. And the rest is history. That's how they found a copy of it.
I mean, like, doing something like Important Cinema Club, it's crazy how, it's like the Albert Pyun thing, that if you like movies and you like very specific things, and I'm always under the assumption that, like, I'm late to the party and everybody's already talked about it, but like some subjects that if you search the name, will be one of the first thing that comes up. Like, we did an episode on the Italian Schlockmeister, Joe D'Amato, and the photo that I put in the description, because we do little banner things at filmtrap.com, shows up on one of the Joe D'Amato Blu-rays that just came out recently.
Really?
Yeah,
oh my
it does.
God. Yeah, that's like with me. My friends just did an episode on A Gnome Named Norm, and we're the first hit, and we're like, oh God.
Yep. You are the authority. You are the Gnome Named Norm scholar now.
I see that my entire point of that, trying to like doing research, was why, Stan Winston, why did you make this terrible movie? It was like an endless hole, and my answer keeps looking at me in the void. It's the question that keeps me up at night now.
He's like, I just wanted to make something my kids could watch. That's probably the answer.
Oh no, if you watch that movie, it's the exact opposite. But thank you so much, Justin, for coming on the show. If they want to find you on social media, where can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Decloux, Decloux, and the letter J. The Important Cinema Club, you can check it out at importantcinemaclub.com. No Such Thing as a Bad Movie. Just search it in Google. We have a SoundCloud page. And you can also follow me on Letterboxd. I watch a lot of movies, and my Letterboxd account is, I think it's just Justin Decloux. So, yep, just search that name in Letterboxd and I'll come up.
If you want to find me on social media, you can find me at Suda41. That's SUDA41. If you want to email the show, you can email us at thefilmcultist@gmail.com. And thank you so much, Justin, for coming on the show one more time.
Oh, thank you for having me, man.
If you want to pick up his book, Radioactive Dreams, The Cinema of Albert Pyun. You can find it. It's available on Amazon. Well, I'm Zach.
And I'm Justin Decloux.
And let's keep it real, guys. See ya!